The corridors of Zenith Academy had never been designed for panic. The architects' three-limbed, Vorath engineers who prided themselves on mathematical perfection had calculated optimal flow rates for exactly 4,847 students moving between classes. They had not, however, accounted for those same students fleeing in absolute terror from a Krell death beast. Jackson pressed his chitinous body against the crystalline wall, his four eyes wide with fear as the stampede rushed past. The Zerillion. Students' natural blue bioluminescence had faded to a sickly gray, a telltale sign of distress among his species. Around him, students of a dozen different races scrambled for the emergency exits, their various forms of screaming creating a cacophony that made his auditory membranes ache. The death beast's roar echoed through the academy's halls, a sound like tearing metal mixed with the final gasps of dying stars. It was a sound that triggered primal fear responses in every sentient species in the Galactic Coalition. Every species, apparently, except one. Fascinating, a voice said beside him. Jackson's eyes swiveled to find Emma, the human exchange student, standing calmly in the middle of the corridor. While everyone else fled, she had her datapad out and was typing rapidly, occasionally glancing down the hall toward where the beast's massive shadow danced across the walls. "Are you insane?" Jackson hissed, his translator implant struggling to convey the proper level of alarm in Standard Galactic. "That's a Krell death beast. We need to evacuate." Emma looked up from her datapad, her peculiar forward-facing eyes showing what Jackson had learned to recognize as curiosity rather than fear. "But it just broke out of the xenobiology lab. This is a once-in-a-lifetime observation opportunity. Once in a lifetime because we're all about to die." The human tilted her head, another one of those distinctly human gestures that Jackson found both alien and oddly expressive. Probably not. The mortality rate for death beast encounters in enclosed spaces with multiple exit routes is only about 34%, and that's before accounting for emergency containment protocols. Only 34%? Jackson felt his bioluminescence flicker with indignation. That means 1 in 3 people die. Well, actually, it's about 1 in 2.94, but... Emma paused, glancing at her datapad again. "Oh, that's interesting. Look at its locomotion pattern." Against every instinct screaming at him to run, Jackson followed her gaze. The death beast had emerged fully into the corridor now, and it was indeed a terrifying sight. Standing nearly 3 meters tall, its 6-legged form was covered in obsidian black armor plating. 3 heads, each with jaws that could bite through. Starship hull plating swiveled independently as it searched for prey. Toxic vapor hissed from vents along its spine, and its 12 eyes glowed with a malevolent red light. It was, without question, one of the most dangerous creatures ever cataloged by Galactic Science. Emma was taking a video. "See how the middle set of legs move in a different rhythm than the front and back pairs?" She narrated into her datapad. "The literature says they move with hexapodal coordination, but this one's clearly using a modified tetrapod gait with the middle legs providing stability. I wonder if that's learned behavior or a variant strain." The death beast's center head swiveled toward them, its nostrils flaring as it caught their scent. "Emma," Jackson whispered urgently, "it's looking at us." "I know, isn't this great? I can get sensory response data." The human raised her datapad higher, zooming in on the creature's facial structure. "Notice how the olfactory organs dilate when it detects potential prey? That suggests a sophisticated chemical analysis system, probably capable of detecting fear pheromones." "Yes, and it's detecting mine right now." Jackson's voice had risen to a pitch that his species normally reserved for mating calls. "Please, can we run?" "In a minute. I just want to see if..." The death beast charged. To Jackson's credit, he did. Not faint, though his legs momentarily forgot how to function. The creature barreled toward them with shocking speed for something so large, its claws tearing gouges in the Academy's supposedly indestructible floor plating. Its triple roar shook dust from the ceiling and set off emergency alarms that seemed entirely too late to be useful. Emma's response was to hold her ground and raise her free hand in the air. "What are you doing?" Jackson managed to shriek. Establishing dominance, Emma replied calmly. Apex predators respond to the death beast skidded to a halt 3 meters away, its heads cocking in unison at the human's raised hand. For a moment, student and creature regarded each other in silence. Then, slowly, Emma brought her hand down in a sharp, decisive motion and shouted a single word in her native language. No. The death beast blinked all 12 eyes in what appeared to be confusion. Bad, Emma added, pointing at a pile of debris the creature had created. Very bad. Sit. Have you lost your mind? Jackson hissed. It's not a domesticated animal. All behavior is trainable, Emma muttered back. Just give me a second. The death beast's heads turned to look at each other, as if consulting about this bizarre turn of events. Then, perhaps because no prey had ever responded this way before, perhaps because the human's confident body language confused its hunting instincts, or perhaps because the universe simply enjoyed irony, the creature's haunches lowered slightly. Good, see? Emma grinned at Jackson. Positive reinforcement works across species. She turned back to the death beast. Stay. The creature stayed, though all 6 of its nostrils were still flaring, and Jackson suspected it was less obeying, and more trying to process whether this small, soft creature was too stupid to eat or too dangerous to attack. Emma took advantage of the standoff to type more notes. Subject exhibits confusion when confronted with non-fear responses. Possible weakness in predatory programming when prey doesn't run. Note for future protocols, death beasts may be manageable through confident behavioral conditioning rather than Student Emma Chun, please step away from the Krell death beast. The shout came from Dean Xylith, the Academy's head administrator, who had finally arrived with a security team. The Haxorian Dean's tentacles were writhing with agitation as he directed his team to establish a perimeter. They carried plasma containment rifles and neural disruptors, their movements precise and professional. Emma looked back at them, then at her datapad, then at the death beast, clearly running calculations. Dean Xylith, I really think if we just now, Miss Chun. With a sigh that Jackson had learned meant the human was disappointed rather than afraid, Emma backed away slowly, maintaining eye contact with the death beast. It's okay, she murmured to the creature. These people aren't going to hurt you if you stay calm. The death beast's heads tracked her movement, but it didn't advance. Seemingly as confused by the entire situation as everyone else, the security team moved in, their weapons charged but held at non-lethal settings. Dean Xylith's tentacles gestured in the pattern for extreme caution. As they deployed a neural net that would humanely sedate the creature without harm, once Emma was safely behind the security perimeter, Jackson finally allowed himself to breathe properly. His bioluminescence was slowly returning to normal, though he suspected he'd be showing stress patterns for days. Are you insane? He repeated, this time with less immediate fear and more genuine bewilderment. Emma was still typing on her datapad. What? No, I just wanted to gather data. Do you know how rare it is to observe death beast behavior outside of combat scenarios? The last comprehensive behavioral study was 70 years ago, and it didn't include any testing of non-aggressive response protocols. There's a reason for that? The reason is that everyone who tries non-aggressive responses gets eaten. Clearly not everyone, Emma said, gesturing at herself with a smile. I'm fine. Jackson's translator implant struggled to find adequate words in Standard Galactic to express his feelings. He settled for a series of clicks that roughly translated to humans are impossible. Dean Xylith approached them as his security team successfully sedated the death beast, its massive form slumping gently to the floor. The Dean's skin had taken on the deep purple color that indicated severe stress in Haxorians. Miss Chun, he began, his voice quivering with barely controlled emotion. In my 300 years as an educator, I have never witnessed such reckless disregard for personal safety. I was maintaining a safe distance. You were taking notes while a death beast charged you. Well, yes, but I made sure to track its velocity so I knew exactly how much time I had to. You shouted at it like a misbehaving pet. Emma had the grace to look slightly sheepish. That was more experimental than planned, I admit. Dean Xylith's tentacles performed a gesture that Jackson's implant translated as approximately equivalent to a human putting their face in their hands. Why? Just why? The human's expression shifted to something more serious. Dean, with all respect, your security protocols for the xenobiology lab are based on the assumption that these creatures are unstoppable killing machines. But if they can be conditioned to respond to non-aggressive stimuli, think about what that means for research, for handling, for emergency protocols. I may have just discovered that death beasts aren't actually as unmanageable as we thought. Isn't that worth some risk? Not when the risk is you getting killed, Miss Chun. But I didn't get killed. Emma gestured at her perfectly intact body. And now we have data. Look, I recorded everything. The creature showed clear hesitation when confronted with confident body language. Its attack sequence can be interrupted if you understand the behavioral triggers. This could save lives in future incidents. Jackson watched as Dean Xylith's color slowly shifted from stressed purple to thoughtful green. The Dean's tentacles performed a complex gesture that indicated grudging acceptance. You will write a complete report, the Dean said finally, and you will submit to a psychological evaluation to ensure you haven't developed some form of death wish psychosis. I don't have a death wish, Emma protested. I just have a scientific curiosity and a calculated risk tolerance. Those are the same thing when applied to death beasts, Jackson muttered. Emma grinned at him. Come on, admit it. That was exciting. That's one word for it, Jackson replied, his bioluminescence finally returning to normal blue. Humans have a very different definition of exciting than the rest of the galaxy. As the security team worked to transport the sedated death beast back to a reinforced containment unit, other students began cautiously returning to the corridor. Word of the incident had already spread through the Academy's communication networks, and Jackson could hear the whispers. The human just walked up to it, She was taking notes. Told it to sit like a domesticated sand-dash crawler, Emma seemed oblivious to the attention, still absorbed in reviewing her footage and making annotations. Jackson watched her work, shaking his head in a gesture he'd learned from humans specifically for moments like this. You know, he said finally, when I applied for the interspecies exchange program, I thought having a human classmate would be educational. Emma looked up, her eyes bright. And? I was right. But nobody mentioned the education would involve regular near-death experiences. Oh, please. That was hardly near-death. I had at least 4 seconds of reaction time before. She paused. Noticing Jackson's glowing had shifted to the yellow of exasperation. You're being sarcastic, aren't you? I'm getting better at detecting that. Practice makes perfect, Jackson said dryly. Dean Xylith's voice interrupted them. All students are to report to their residential quarters immediately. Classes are suspended for the remainder of the day while we conduct a full security review. His gaze fixed on Emma. Miss Chun, my office, 1 hour. Emma nodded, unfazed. As the dean departed, she turned back to Jackson. Want to help me organize my data? I'm thinking of submitting this to the Journal of Xenobiological Behavior. You're going to publish this? Why not? It's solid field research. She started walking toward the residential wing, still scrolling through her notes. I'll need to account for variable stress levels in closed environment, potential prior conditioning, but the core observation is sound. Death beasts can be behaviorally modified through non-aggressive dominance displays. Jackson followed her, partly because they were going the same direction and partly because he'd learned that humans often needed someone to make sure they didn't walk into walls while distracted. Emma, he said carefully, most species would have run, would have been traumatized. You took notes. The human glanced at him with a slight smile. Jackson, humans didn't get to the top of Earth's food chain by running away from things that scared us. We got there by studying them, understanding them, and figuring out how to manage them. Sure, a death beast is terrifying. It's supposed to be, that's its evolutionary advantage. But terror is just another variable to account for. That's not normal, Jackson pointed out. Maybe not, Emma agreed. But it's human. They walked in companionable silence for a moment before Jackson spoke again. For what it's worth, I'm glad you weren't hurt. Thanks. I'm glad you didn't faint. I came very close. I know. Your bioluminescence went practically white. That was interesting too, actually. I've been meaning to ask if you could help me understand the full spectrum of Xyrillian stress responses. For my xenopsychology paper, Jackson's glow shifted to the pink of affection mixed with exasperation and emotional combination he'd experienced frequently since meeting. Emma, humans, he said, his voice fond despite his words. You're all absolutely insane. Emma laughed, a sound that Jackson had grown to appreciate over their months as classmates. Yeah, she agreed cheerfully. But you're kind of insane, right? Jackson thought about the human who stood her ground while others ran, who saw a killing machine and wondered about its locomotion patterns, who looked at death and took notes. She was reckless and brilliant and completely unpredictable. And she had just potentially revolutionized xenobiological field protocols by being too curious to be properly afraid. Yes, he admitted finally, his bioluminescence warming to a bright, genuine blue. I suppose you are? Behind them, the security team finally succeeded in moving the Death Beast, its massive form floating in a containment field as it was guided back to the laboratory. Ahead of them, the academy stretched out in crystalline corridors, full of knowledge and discovery and apparently occasional escaped apex predators. Emma was already making plans. You know, if we could get authorization, I'd love to run some proper behavioral experiments. Nothing dangerous, she added quickly, seeing Jackson's alarmed flicker. Just, controlled observations. Testing response to various stimuli. Maybe even attempt some basic conditioning protocols. You want to train death beasts. Not train exactly, just ... understand their learning capacity. Jackson sighed, the sound translating through his implant with perfect clarity. He'd been right about the interspecies exchange being educational. He just hadn't realized he'd be learning quite so much about the peculiar fearlessness of humans. I'll help you write the proposal, he heard himself say. Emma's smile could have powered a small star. Really? Really. Someone needs to make sure you include proper safety protocols. He paused. Extensive, redundant, possibly excessive safety protocols? Deal, as they continued down the corridor. Other students gave them a wide berth, whispering about the human who faced down a death beast with a datapad and the Xyrillian who stayed with her. By the next day, the story would be all over the academy. By the next week, it would spread to other institutions. And eventually it would become one of those stories that explained why humans, despite being physically unimpressive and biologically fragile, had earned their place in the galactic community, because while other species had claws and armor and natural weapons, humans had something more dangerous, an insatiable curiosity and the audacity to take notes while everyone else was running away. Emma glanced at her datapad one more time, then grinned. You know what the best part is? I got everything in 4K resolution. The facial expressions alone are publishable. Jackson's bioluminescence shifted through several colors before settling on resigned blue. Humans, he repeated, but this time it sounded almost like a compliment. Emma just smiled and kept walking. Already planning her next experiment, her next observation? Her next dance with danger, armed with nothing but curiosity and a datapad. Behind them, the academy returned slowly to normal, though normal would forever be slightly different now. Because everyone had learned an important lesson. When something terrifying broke loose and everyone panicked, there would always be at least one human taking notes, and somehow, impossibly, that human would probably be fine.